He was probably the most unpopular man in America. He had been invited to speak at the dedication of a cemetery as an afterthought. And the orator who spoke before him was eloquent and popular. And the man spoke for 3 hours straight, and it was good. And then it was the president's turn. And Abraham Lincoln stood up and walked awkwardly to the podium. The crowd gave a sigh of, okay, here he comes. Lincoln was not a good man to look at. He had elbows and he was just awkward. His voice wasn't beautiful to listen to. It was a little high-pitched. And then he gave the Gettysburg Address, perhaps the most famous speech in American history. And he gave it in just a minute and a half. It was under 3 minutes. In fact, some people hadn't even started listening to him yet when he stopped and looked out over the crowd. And it was completely silent. No one clapped. Those who had been listening were awestruck by the words. Lincoln looked down and realized that the speech had been yet another failure. And he turned and he sat down, not knowing that his words would ring into eternity. He said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This is a brilliant beginning. Conceived in liberty. Think about a little baby being conceived. What is it when it's in its mother's womb? It's a group of cells. It looks like a tadpole. It looks like a hamster. And then finally it starts to look like a baby, but its head is way too big and its body's way too small. And then it's born and it's ugly, but cute and adorable. And then you take it to church and you dedicate it. You dedicate this baby to God, saying when this baby grows up, he or she will do great things for God. But nobody expects that baby to be great that moment. And Lincoln is saying 77 years ago, like 75 years ago, not that long ago, our nation was conceived. And when it was born, it was dedicated. And the ideas that he shares, the idea of liberty and all men are created equal, he's saying we haven't grown up yet. Okay? Obviously, we're fighting a war over slavery. We're not perfect. But that's what we've been dedicated to do, to one day grow up into our destiny. And he says now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Will this baby live? Because right now, if the Confederates win, the baby dies. Liberty, all men are created equal, that idea dies. Can we win? Can we endure? Can we thrive based on this radical idea of liberty and freedom? Lincoln goes on to say, we are met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. These soldiers, they died for that baby we're talking about, for our nation. He says it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or distract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. And then Lincoln paints the vision, not just for the rest of the war or for the rest of his presidency, but for the rest of American history. this part is for you and me. It doesn't matter how you voted a couple days ago. This is for us. He said, it is for us the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. He says, yeah, we can dedicate this ground. We can build a monument or throw up a flag. But what's more important is if we dedicate ourselves to push for what they were doing. You see, the men who died here died so that this nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, can live. And we have to be dedicated to the exact same ideals. We have to sacrifice for this idea, for this nation, just like they did. It is rather for us here to be dedicated to this great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. Those soldiers gave it all. Why can't we step up and give a little bit more for this idea of liberty and freedom? He says that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Over 51,000 men died on the Battle of Gettysburg. And Lincoln is saying, they shall not die in vain. And then his voice rings out over the ages that says that this nation, the United States of America, under God, who is the source of all freedom, shall have a new birth of freedom. He's saying it was conceived in liberty, it was born, it was dedicated, and now we're in a great struggle. We are fighting. And he says it is time to have a new birth. Guys, he's talking about baptism here. When you're old enough and you realize, oh my goodness, I want to dedicate my life to the same God that my parents dedicated me to when I was a little baby. Back then, I was nothing. Now, I have the freedom to make my own decisions. I have the willpower to decide what I want to dedicate my life to. I'm ready to be a Christian. And Lincoln's audience is Christian. They've all been to baby dedications. They've all been to baptisms. And Lincoln is saying it was conceived in liberty. It was dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And now look at what we're going through right here. Now is the time for us to see the sacrifice of these soldiers and for us to step up and have a new birth of freedom. A rededication, a baptism of dying to the old self and rising to the new self. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, he says, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people. You see, that's what makes the American form of government so unique. It is of us. Everyone elected is one of us. It is by us that they are elected, and it exists for us. You see, the majority of world history, the governments exist for the people on top. The pharaoh, the Caesar, the dictator, the king, the nobles. It's for the top levels, the elites. And that's why the elites have attacked America so much. That's why there's a big push in our society right now where the elites are telling normal average Americans like you and me, you don't understand this. Just trust me. Let me take the responsibility from you. I'll give you free health care. I'll give you free housing. I'll give you all this stuff. I'll take care of your needs. I'll make the decisions. You can't do it. I'm elite and it's just too hard for you. And that is an attack on our freedom. Our government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. Our government does not exist to support itself. It exists to support us. And Lincoln says, this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Of the people, by the people, for the people represents freedom. And Lincoln is calling not only the people who listen to that address, but to you and me to stand up, to have a new birth of freedom, to look back at the men and the women who struggled and died in all of our wars past and say, no, this nation is going to be a nation of freedom. And there are things in our nation now that are taking away our freedoms. There are abuses. There is corruption. And it is up to us to stand up and fix and clean up and change and improve and ennoble America. Because America is just like you and me, baby. She's not perfect, but she wants to be better. She wants to go to those ideals conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That is our birthright. That is our end goal. That's where you and I can work together to take people, because that is what makes America great. That is what makes us the land of the free and the home of the brave. God bless you, and God bless America.